Welcome to the fifth in Vibrant Health's educational webinar series. Today's class is on the topic of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Let's get started. The pre-agricultural diet of our hunter-gatherer ancestors was varied, providing ample calories, dense with micronutrients. It was higher in fiber, rich in fruits and vegetables, and heavily infused with lean, wild meat, fish, poultry, nuts, and seeds. As a result, the diet was lower in total fat and saturated fat, but contained nearly equal amounts of omega-6 and omega-3 essential fatty acids in populations living along seacoasts, and about twice the amount of omega-6 as omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids among inland-dwelling populations. That means the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids from plant and animal foods was estimated to be 2 to 1 back in our Paleolithic days, and may have reached 1 to 1 in coastal dwelling clans where fish, shellfish, and sea vegetables were regularly consumed. You will probably not be surprised to learn that today, ratios of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids range from 10 to 1 all the way up to 20 to 1 or 25 to 1, depending on one's diet. Our present diets are consequently deficient in omega-3 fatty acids compared to the diet upon which humans evolved and upon which their genetic patterns and biochemical pathways were established. Flatly stated, the dietary fats we ingest today do not match the essential crying needs of the human body. The same holds true for the animals we consume. Animal husbandry establishes an artificial diet and living environment that dramatically alters the fatty acid ratios in the tissues of the animals. A steer, pig, chicken, or lamb fed cereal grains, which are rich sources of omega-6 fatty acids in the form of linoleic acid, will incorporate more omega-6 fatty acids into their tissues primarily as arachidonic acid, a metabolite of linoleic acid. The meat from these industrially farmed animals no longer contains a balanced 2 to 1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids, a ratio common to wild animals. Instead, it is usually skewed closer to a ratio of 10 to 1. Eat today's meat and you elevate your omega-6 intake, eat wild meat and you elevate your omega-3 intake. Omega-6 fatty acids insinuate themselves into our diets not only through the consumption of meat. When we fry foods in omega-6 rich vegetable oils, or use vegetable oils in salad dressings and in mayonnaise, or put them in baked goods, pies, cakes, crackers, muffins, we end up ingesting ever larger quantities of omega-6 fatty acids. Modern dietary habits drag us far away from the ideal 2 to 1 or 1 to 1 ratios of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. In plants, linoleic acid is the major omega-6 fatty acid, and alpha-linolenic acid is the major omega-3 fatty acid. In meats, the metabolite of linoleic acid, arachidonic acid, is the primary omega-6 fatty acid. In the human body, linoleic acid is metabolized to arachidonic acid, and alpha-linolenic acid is allegedly metabolized to eicosapentaenoic acid, or EPA, and to docosahexaenoic acid, DHA. More on this later. Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are important components of practically all cell membranes. The polyunsaturated fatty acid composition of cell membranes will change based on dietary intake. More importantly, omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids are converted by cells into significantly different chemically active substances within our bodies. Many of those substances have powerful effects, influencing inflammation, metabolism, gene expression, and cell-to-cell communication. The omnivores among us who consume meat, bread, dairy products, and eggs, along with vegetables and some processed foods, will abuse the demands of their ancient biochemistry by feeding polyunsaturated fatty acid ratios grossly out of balance, dominated by omega-6 fatty acids. Could the answer to this dietary dilemma be found in a vegetarian diet? Not quite. Although there are many factors on which to recommend a vegetarian diet, the balance of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids is not one of them. Omega-6 fatty acids, largely as linoleic acid, dominate most vegetarian diets, as shown on the second to last line in the chart on this slide. Omega-6 and omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids demand our attention because they are metabolically distinct with opposing physiological functions. Their balance is important for normal development of the young and for cardiovascular health, brain function, and inflammation, to name just 4 major areas of influence. Reproductive and neonatal studies of non-human primates and human newborns indicate that the omega-3 fatty acid, docosahexaenoic acid, DHA, is essential for the full development of the brain and retina of the eye, particularly in premature infants. These facts mandate supplementation during pregnancy. Once the baby is born and nursing, the mother's dietary balance of omega-6 to omega-3 fats continues to be essential for normal growth and maturation, as is an adequate intake of the element zinc. So far, the omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid and the omega-6 linoleic acid are classified as essential to human survival. I believe both EPA and DHA should be added to the list. Essentiality means we cannot make the lipids ourselves and must receive them through dietary sources. They can be burned for energy, but serve most critically as raw materials for the synthesis of hormones and eicosanoids, that is, prostaglandins, prostacyclins, thromboxanes, and leukotrienes. Eicosanoids are hormone-like materials that are synthesized on the spot as needed by cells in a tissue rather than by some remotely located endocrine gland. Their impact is almost always localized. Omega-3 and omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids have different molecular structures, but can nevertheless often travel down similar biochemical pathways, ultimately exerting quite different and opposite effects. Eicosanoids derived from omega-6 fatty acids tend to increase inflammation, especially as part of an immune response. They raise the risk of blood clot formation and arterial damage, and stimulate cell proliferation. Although this last effect is admirable when trying to heal a wound, it is less admirable in any stage of tumor development. Eicosanoids derived from omega-3 fatty acids reduce inflammation, reduce blood viscosity, and reduce the risk of blood clot formation and vascular damage, while still permitting appropriate and controlled cell proliferation necessary for healing. In an ideal world, a 2-to-1 balance of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids can help achieve optimal health. At the heart of our society's high intake of dietary omega-6 fatty acids are the innate oils in seeds. Soybeans are seeds, peanuts are seeds, corn, safflowers, sunflowers, sesame, cotton, wheat, rye, oats, and more all give us seeds. Oils pressed from them are potent sources of omega-6 fatty acids. Even those very few with favorable levels of omega-3 fatty acids, for example, flaxseed, walnut, and canola, the low erucic acid rapeseed oil, give us their omega-3 as alpha-linolenic acid, whose conversion to the required EPA and DHA is pitifully low or non-existent. Although seed oils have been used in cooking by several cultures over the last 4,000 to 5,000 years, commercial production and use of vegetable oils in the U.S. really only took hold at the beginning of the 20th century. Cottonseed oil was used early on, with soybean oil, first pressed in 1911, slowly catching up beginning in the 1920s and into the 1930s. Exigencies of World War II and improvements in refining catapulted soybean oil forward to become the most widely used seed oil today. In the last century, the estimated per capita consumption of soybean oil increased more than 1,000-fold from 1909 to 1999. Whereas it accounted for 0.6% of dietary calories in 1909, by 1999, soybean oil supplied 7.38% of total dietary calories on average. Over the same period, however, total fat consumption increased only 1.7%, indicating that the last century brought marked changes in the types and amounts of fats consumed. If you prefer gazing at hard numbers, here is a numerical representation of the data in the graphs. Oil in snack foods, fast foods, large volume baked goods, including cookies and crackers, and in sweets and salad dressings, reflected in the 116,300% increase in its use over the 20th century. Seed oils grew to replace animal fats for cooking purposes, replacing butter, lard, and tallow, for example, thereby raising the proportion of dietary omega-6 linoleic acid more than 200%, while intake of the mammalian omega-3's, eicosapentaenoic acid EPA and docosahexaenoic acid DHA, diminished. Initially, no one noticed, and no one really cared, because the importance of omega-3 fatty acids was not fully understood at the time. Awareness of their value began to percolate in the 1970s, but in the 1960s, it was still believed that the ability of linoleic acid to lower cholesterol was a good thing, and consumption of seed oils was encouraged by physicians and media alike. Some recommended taking 2 tablespoons a day of straight safflower oil, the new darling among the seed oils, as a way to ensure heart health, and yet it didn't. Is the extra linoleic acid a problem? Yep. The per capita consumption of soybean oil increased more than 1,000-fold over the course of the 20th century. This unprecedented uptake in soy oil consumption consequently resulted in a 3-fold increase in the intake of linoleic acid. Since alpha-linolenic acid, the vegetable form of omega-3 fats, is also found in soy oil, albeit at a much smaller level, alpha-linolenic acid intake increased 2-fold. Over the same time period, EPA and DHA nutrition from other sources remained surprisingly stable. Given the additional 0% to 2% conversion of alpha-linolenic acid to EPA and DHA, there is actually a slight increase in omega-3 fatty acid intake over the course of the 20th century. But it wasn't enough. The net effect of the much larger increase in linoleic acid intake overwhelmed the small increases in dietary omega-3 fatty acids, leading to a decrease of EPA and DHA in human tissues by century's end. So what are the biological requirements? A recommended dietary allowance for essential fatty acids does not yet exist, but there are clues we can pull from epidemiological studies of Eskimos and hunter-gatherer populations conducted before 1980, and other work continuing up to today. Since omega-3 fatty acids have become famous in relation to cardiovascular health, let's see what various diets provide. For many years, it was known that Japanese had rates of heart disease that are dramatically lower than those of Western man. Japanese diets are rich in EPA, the omega-3 fatty acid famously found in fish oils. Coastal Japanese get 5 grams to 6 grams, and inland-dwelling Japanese still get 2 to 3 grams daily. Omega-3s are also in the meat and blubber of Arctic animals, making the native diets of Greenland Eskimos so rich in EPA that daily average intake is about 13 grams. It is safe to assume that such a high daily intake of EPA provides more EPA than the human body actually needs. Follow-up studies confirm it, for Eskimos do not have a lower rate of coronary artery disease. Why? Because EPA and DHA are extremely volatile lipids. They oxidize very quickly. High intakes in the absence of strong antioxidant protections, especially vitamin E and tocotrienols, leads to fibrotic and lipofuscin infiltration of tissues, oxidative damage, and inflammation. Yet, as the amount of EPA in the diet decreases below a certain level, the risk of coronary heart disease increases. The inland Japanese seem to have achieved protection at 2 to 3 grams per day. In contrast, Westerners who live in the United States and inland areas of Europe consume only around 20 milligrams, 1/100th of the lowest figure for the inland Japanese. Why is EPA from fish oil so important? In a nutshell, it makes your blood less viscous, less sticky, and less prone to form random clots. The multitude of clear platelet cells floating through your blood are part of the complex system that clots blood to halt its loss when you are injured. They quickly migrate to the site of the trauma, attach themselves to the edges of a break in the blood vessel, and secrete eicosanoids that direct the healing process. They're always ready to do their job. That means they are always prepared to clump together or aggregate. The tendency to aggregate depends on certain conditions. Each platelet cell produces an icosanoid called thromboxane to help it do this. Cells lining the blood vessels, the endothelial cells, do not want platelet cells to stick or clump at random, thus laying the foundation for a blood clot. The endothelial cells in arterial walls produce their own anti-aggregatory icosanoid called prostacyclin. It is an anticoagulant and vasodilator. The prostacyclin and thromboxane work against each other, maintaining a balance that keeps the blood flowing freely. Both the prostacyclin manufactured by the endothelial cells and the thromboxane produced by the platelet cells are made from either of two specific prostaglandins, yet another icosanoid. The two prostaglandins that can be used by the endothelial cells and the platelets to make prostacyclin and thromboxane respectively are called prostaglandin H3 or PGH3, which is made from omega-3 fatty acids, and prostaglandin H2 or PGH2, which is made from omega-6 fatty acids. Fatty acids beget prostaglandins, who beget prostacyclins and thromboxanes. The type of prostacyclin and thromboxane one ends up with depends on the type of prostaglandin that's served as the starting material. The fatty acid used to make the prostaglandin, therefore, has a profound effect on the pro-aggregatory property of the thromboxane and on the anti-aggregatory strength of the prostacyclin. Looking at the left side of the slide, prostaglandin H2, made from omega-6 fatty acids, is produced in and metabolized by the platelets into a relatively strong thromboxane called TXA2. The same prostaglandin is also made in endothelial cells and metabolized to produce a prostacyclin called PGI2. So, prostaglandin PGH2, made inside both platelet cells and endothelial cells lining the blood vessel, gives us platelet cells that tend to clump together more readily, in addition to endothelial cells with weaker resistance against the sticky clumpiness of the blood platelets. When platelet cells and endothelial cells instead use omega-3 fatty acids to make prostaglandin H3 and turn it into different forms of thromboxane and prostacyclin respectively, we end up with a different and healthier result. The platelet cell is filled with thromboxane TXA3, and the endothelial cells facing off against them generate prostacyclin PGI3. This is good news because TXA3 is much less pro-aggregatory than TXA2, making the platelets less sticky and less prone to clumping. Pushing back against the innate stickiness of blood platelets, PGI3 in the endothelial cells is much more strongly anti-aggregatory than PGI2. This means the blood vessel wall is slipperier. This is a good thing. PGH3, in effect, causes blood to be less prone to clot because blood platelets are less likely to clump together themselves or to stick to the walls of the blood vessels. Both the blood platelets and the lining of the blood vessels have become slipperier because the starting material for thromboxane and prostacyclin was prostaglandin H3 made from omega-3 fatty acids. This rather confused image illustrates what adhesive blood platelets, nurtured by omega-6 fatty acids, can do. At the upper center, you will see the, quote, adhered platelets. Sticky blood platelets can form the nucleus of a blood clot, either as a clump moving through the blood vessels or when they become plastered against the blood vessel wall. A platelet attached to a blood vessel wall sends thromboxane down to the muscle layer of the blood vessel. Thromboxane tells the muscle cells to reproduce themselves at a rapid pace because the mindless blood platelet cannot discern whether there really is an injury to the blood vessel or not. If there is no injury, no real healing will take place, but a lump of muscle and tangled collagen will instead form inside an otherwise healthy blood vessel. The growing lump constricts the flow of blood and may eventually rupture the endothelial lining of the artery, causing a lesion that serves as a magnet for the collection of more platelet cells, cholesterol, red blood cells, foam cells, and other components of plaque. Sticky platelets are not your friends. Prostaglandin H2, the unhealthy one, is synthesized from arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is an omega-6 fatty acid supplied from fats in eggs and meat. It is made from linoleic acid, the fatty acid abundantly supplied by vegetable oils from grains, nuts, and seeds. Linoleic acid and arachidonic acid are omega-6 fats. They serve as the precursors to PGH2 or prostaglandin in the black hat. Omega-3 fatty acids serve as precursors to PGH3, the prostaglandin in the white hat. The omega-3 EPA is a direct precursor of the more anti-aggregatory prostaglandin PGH3. It is also a precursor of DHA. DHA itself can be converted to PGH3 as well. Wild meats and cold water fish supply both DHA and EPA for the rapid, full production of the protective prostacyclin PGI3 and the weak thromboxane TXA3. This is just the combination you want if you wish to keep your blood free flowing and lower your risk of heart attack, phlebitis, or stroke due to the random and inappropriate formation of blood clots. So how much do you need, really? The American Heart Association maintains that people with diagnosed coronary heart or artery disease should consume about 1 gram, 1,000 milligrams, of EPA and DHA omega-3 fatty acids daily, preferably from eating fish. In a population with woefully low intakes of omega-3 fatty acids, any amount of added omega-3s is helpful, but the American Heart Association needs to re-examine its position. Many people do not like fish or do not have access to a good supply of fish, so it is unreasonable to expect them to eat 1 or more servings of fish per day. On top of that, it is the wild, oily fish from cold waters, salmon, mackerel, sardines, for example, that are superior sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Farmed varieties of these fish contain less. Additionally, the biomass of omega-3 oils in fish varies widely among species, so even if someone loves fish and eats it frequently, the desired level of omega-3 fatty acids may not be present on the plate. More important, the American Heart Association's recommended dosage is too low based on historical information, epidemiological data, and the more sedentary lifestyle of today's population. Yet, their recommendation for omega-3 intake aligns with other ultra-conservative government-backed authorities that have weighed in on the issue. On the question of omega-6 intake, the American Heart Association adopts a feckless position, ignoring biochemistry to state, quote, although increasing omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acid tissue levels does reduce the risk of coronary heart disease, it does not follow that decreasing omega-6 levels will do the same, close quotes. So, as shown on the next table, the American Heart Association has no recommendation for healthful intakes of omega-6 fatty acids. The European Scientific Committee on Food in 1992 put forward a balanced daily intake of approximately 1 gram per day of EPA and DHA, matched to 5 grams of omega-6 fatty acids for women, and a daily intake of 1.6 grams omega-3s matched to 6.4 grams of omega-6 fatty acids for men. That yields ratios of 5:1 for women and 4:1 for men, which is still heavily weighted toward omega-6 and far from the ideal ratios of 2:1 or 1:1. The European Food Safety Authority in 2009 put forward a more nuanced recommendation of 2 grams per day of omega-3 fatty acids as alpha-linolenic acid and only 250 milligrams per day of EPA and DHA in association with an omega-6 fatty acid intake of 10 grams per day as linoleic acid. This yields an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 4.44 to 1 that falls just about in the middle of the ratios from the earlier European Scientific Committee on Food, but it's still beyond the targets of 2:1 or 1:1. The European Food Safety Authority's 2009 recommendations are worse, however, because alpha-linolenic acid is so feebly converted to EPA or DHA in the human body. Their 2 grams of alpha-linolenic acid will do little to improve omega-3 levels or to counterbalance the negative effects of omega-6 fatty acids. The Food and Nutrition Board of the U.S. Institute of Medicine established alleged adequate intake levels for omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids in 2002 that, in my opinion, will continue to assure that heart disease and vascular diseases remain the #1 killers in the United States. The Food and Nutrition Board recommends an intake of 1.6 grams of omega-3 fatty acids for men and 1.1 grams per day for women aged 19 and above. The specified source is again alpha-linolenic acid, with no reference to EPA or DHA, the forms most biologically active in human tissue. Matched to these low intakes of omega-3 fatty acids, the Food and Nutrition Board recommended daily omega-6 intakes of 17 grams for men and 12 grams for women in the form of linoleic acid. Some quick math tells us that the U.S. authorities recommend omega-6 to omega-3 ratios of 10.6 to 1 for men and 11 to 1 for women. Not only are the ratios of their recommendations egregiously out of balance, but the chosen source of omega-3 fatty acids is alpha-linolenic acid. It is entirely inadequate. The omega-3 fatty acid, alpha-linolenic acid, is supposed to be converted to eicosapentaenoic acid, or EPA. This can occur in many mammals with alacrity, especially rodents. Although the conversion is theoretically possible in humans, in fact, it takes place at a very low rate of efficiency, if at all. And if linoleic acid and/or arachidonic acid are abundant in the diet due to the consumption of grains, vegetable oils, and animal products, then even the minimal residual conversion of alpha-linolenic acid to EPA will be further slowed or even forsaken. You see, the same enzymes are used in the metabolism of both the essential omega-6 fatty acid, linoleic acid, and the essential omega-3 fatty acid, alpha-linolenic acid, to downstream lipids. The processes can be almost completely co-opted to the omega-6 fatty acid pathway when they are abundantly supplied. If supplies of EPA are insufficient or unavailable from the foods you eat, then arachidonic acid and linoleic acid will be used for the eventual production of eicosanoids. The results are less than healthy, as we have seen. On the other hand, when EPA is abundant in the diet, then incorporation of EPA into platelet cells and endothelial cells for the synthesis of PGH3 is quite rapid, and conversion of omega-6 fatty acids to PGH2 is abandoned. Your body will preferentially use EPA and DHA as the source of prostaglandins if they are supplied in an amount adequate to compete against linoleic acid. If we wish to reduce our individual risk of coronary heart disease, phlebitis, stroke, gangrene from diabetes, deep vein thrombosis, and any other disorder where blood circulation is compromised, then we must restore our dietary intake of EPA and DHA to levels closely matching that of our ancestors from the old Stone Age, that is, Paleolithic times. Wild meats with their high omega-3 fatty acid content are no longer widely available, but there are steps one can take. The goal can be achieved by replacing much of the beef, pork, and lamb in our present diets with fish and dietary supplements of EPA and DHA. Fatty fish supplies most of the EPA and DHA. Among them are sardines, mackerel, herring, kippers, tuna, bonito, pilchard, butterfish, never seen one of those, bluefish, and of course, salmon. We can enhance synthesis of cardioprotective anti-inflammatory eicosanoids from omega-3s by replacing safflower, soy, corn, peanut, sunflower, canola, sesame, and other vegetable and seed oils in salad dressings, baked goods, and cooking with olive oil and coconut oil. The practice shrinks the intake of omega-6 fatty acid, linoleic acid. Given the scarcity of wild meats, it will be nearly impossible to obtain healthful, protective amounts of omega-3 fatty acids unless dietary supplements are used. Human clinical trials from the 1970s demonstrated early on that 1.8 to 3.6 grams of EPA daily as fish oil supplements, also containing 1.2 to 2.4 grams of DHA, would reduce serum triglycerides, elevate HDL cholesterol levels, and naturally increase bleeding time as blood viscosity was reduced. At lower dosages of 900 milligrams, very close to the American Heart Association recommendation of 1 gram, EPA content of blood platelet cells was substantially increased, but the other benefits to blood chemistry were not realized universally among all test subjects. At the same time, it was noticed that high alpha-linolenic acid intake, the plant omega-3, was far less effective at raising the proportion of omega-3 fatty acids in platelet cells. Alpha-linolenic acid just doesn't do the job. It is not taken in by the cells and converted to EPA and DHA with the required level of efficiency. We have lost the ability to do so over time, presumably because consumption of wild meats by our ancestors brought in sufficient amounts of EPA and DHA. Prehumans no longer needed to convert alpha-linolenic acid to EPA and DHA, so the gene controlling synthesis of the delta-6 desaturase enzyme that converts alpha-linolenic acid to stearidonic acid was nearly totally shut down. In some persons, it is completely silenced. This means that walnut, canola, and flaxseed oils that are so heavily promoted as excellent sources of omega-3 fats actually provide little value. EPA will flow more freely from cuts and wounds, helping flush bacteria from the site. The other clotting factors remain unchanged, however, and coagulation eventually proceeds normally. It has been suggested that the prolonged bleeding times seen in EPA research may actually represent a return to normal bleeding times. I propose that the modern diet, with its high intake of arachidonic acid and linoleic acid, has led to an unusually short bleeding time. In other words, the statistically normal bleeding times expected by the medical community and lay people alike represent an abnormal situation, one that we now know increases the risk of blood clot formation, heart attack, and stroke. Are you sufficiently confused now about how much EPA and DHA you need? We can solve this dilemma with a little math. If the average content of wild meat is 4.3% fat, 32% of which is polyunsaturated fat, and if 2 pounds of wild meat weighs in at 907.2 grams, then from wild meat alone, our ancestors ingested 39 grams of fat, 12.5 grams of which were polyunsaturated. If the polyunsaturated fats from wild meats are roughly 1/3 omega-3s and 2/3 omega-6s, then our progenitors were exposed to and adapted to a daily intake of 4.17 grams of EPA and DHA. Keep this number in mind. Seafood gobbling coastal Japanese consume about 5 or 6 grams of EPA and have a very low incidence of cardiovascular disease. Furthermore, controlled human trials have shown that 1.8 to 3.6 grams of EPA per day can greatly improve blood chemistry and lower the risk of cardiac events. But in Europe and the US, we must counteract diets that supply an abundance of omega-6 fatty acids ranging from a low of 5 grams up to 17 grams per day. If nothing is done to curtail daily exposure to omega-6s, meaning intake remains at those levels, then a daily intake of 2.5 grams to 8.5 grams of omega-3s would be required each day to hit an ideal 2-to-1 ratio. Those numbers surround the 4.17 grams calculated earlier. Eating less meat in favor of fatty fish and eating larger portions of fresh vegetables will reduce the intake of arachidonic acid. Eliminating vegetable oils other than olive oil and coconut oil from baking and cooking practices will drop linoleic acid intake. Eggs from free-range chickens who eat insects and grass can help reduce arachidonic acid intake too. These simple and easily adopted dietary modifications will improve the amount and beneficial impact of omega-3 fatty acids in one's diet. Coupling these dietary recommendations with supplements of 2 grams of EPA or 3 grams of combined EPA and DHA from fish oils should achieve the desired ratio between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. If you fall off the wagon at Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks or gorge on a massive steak, then your supplementation can be increased that day to balance the enlarged servings of arachidonic acid and linoleic acid. In these cases, supplemental intakes of 4 grams or 5 grams of combined EPA and DHA would be recommended. Using only fish as a source of omega-3s would be difficult. To get 1 gram of omega-3 fatty acids from salmon, for example, you would need to eat 1 or 2 servings of salmon, 4 to 7 servings of cod, or 4 servings of shrimp per day. Swallowing a capsule or 2 of fish oils is a lot easier. Modern refining technology applied to fish oils has indeed made it easy. Capsules that can deliver 500 milligrams, 700 milligrams, and even up to 900 milligrams of combined EPA and DHA are now available. These new supplements, including krill oil, will make it easier to swallow supplemental dosages of 2 grams of omega-3s for those of you on low to moderate meat and grain diets, and 4 to 5 grams of omega-3s for those eating heavier amounts of meat and or grain. The recommendations made above cannot be considered precise for every individual, however. Why? Because not everyone eats the same diet or the same types of fat, plus lifestyle, genetic predisposition, and the finite workings of human biochemistry are unique to each among us all. In addition, there may be specific conditions to consider. To lower unusually high triglycerides, dietary modification and supplementation with 2 to 4 grams are often recommended. To prevent or treat heart disease, more than fish oil capsules are needed. Dietary and lifestyle modifications are essential in cases of diagnosed cardiovascular disease. Oily fish high in omega-3s are preferred as the focal point of 2 to 4 major meals each week, along with the elimination of sources of arachidonic acid and linoleic acid from red meats, grains, and vegetable oils. Olive oil and coconut oil are still okay. Supplementation with fish oil capsules that would deliver 5 grams of EPA alone is recommended. However, it should be noted that a simultaneous increase in the intake of antioxidants would be required. These include tocotrienols, vitamin E, vitamin C complex, pomegranate extract, grapeseed extract, cranberry extract, zinc, glutathione, and a diet rich in colorful fruits and green leafy vegetables. The conflict between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids is pronounced in rheumatoid arthritis. Arachidonic acid serves as the starting material for the synthesis of inflammatory chemicals in the human body. These include, but are not limited to, certain classes of adhesion factors, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and interleukins. When replaced by EPA, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and interleukins made from that omega-3 fatty acid have a lower or no inflammatory potency compared to those produced from arachidonic acid. Furthermore, EPA and DHA give rise to anti-inflammatory and inflammation-resolving mediators called resolvins, protectins, and maressins, thereby helping subdue inflammation. Omega-3s also reduce the synthesis of cartilage-degrading proteinases, cyclooxygenase 2, and inflammatory cytokines, with EPA more effective than DHA or alpha-linolenic acid, as could be expected. DHA is very active, though, converting 14/17-hydroxydicosahexaenoic acid, a precursor of anti-inflammatory resolvins and maressins. The anti-inflammatory properties of EPA and DHA have been realized with daily dosages ranging from 1.7 grams EPA with 1.1 grams DHA, all the way up to 4.6 grams of EPA with 2.5 grams of DHA. EPA always predominates, but DHA is there lending some very important anti-inflammatory backup. The bottom line is that we have flipped our diets relative to omega-6 and omega-3 fats since the advent of agriculture. It has worked to our detriment. The task now is to become aware and make the dietary and lifestyle changes to restore the balance and good health supported by the required dietary supplements. This brings today's webinar to a close. Questions will now be entertained. Oh, look at that. Things are changing. Okay, let me see. What else we got? I have new chapter, whole mega from Alaskan salmon. That should be a good product. I don't know what the potencies are because I'm not familiar with how big that capsule is. If it is a 20 oblong capsule, then it should have a good amount in it. I would, well, without knowing the potency, I can't tell you how many would be good to take. And without knowing your diet, it would also be foolish to tell you how many of those to take. What do you recommend for a good supplement? Oh, well, I personally use Carlson Super Omega 3's. I've been using them for years. They are triglyceride form. They're 50% capsule, so that, in other words, each capsule contains 500 milligrams of EPA, and they don't repeat. It's one of the top line refined forms of EPA and DHA that I've ever found, so I stuck with it. I'm sure there are others, and I have on occasion used others without a problem. Right from your regular pharmacy or CVS or Rite Aid, you can usually find capsules in there as high as 900 milligrams per capsule. And those are usually in enteric coated capsules too, so they bypass your stomach and avoid any risk of burping. Okay, what is the best cooking oil for more omega-3 oils? None. You do not want to cook with omega-3 oils. Omega-3 oils are extremely volatile. They oxidize almost instantly. I remember hearing a story about some people who were working with omega-3s, and they'd sopped up some omega-3 in these rags and tossed them in the corner of the laboratory. And within an hour, they'd caught fire. They oxidize that quickly. So that's why a highly refined oil is good, because it removes any oxidized fractions and gets it sealed up in a nice gelatin capsule that is impermeable to oxygen. So if you were to take an omega-3 oil and cook with it, you're going to be oxidizing it almost instantly. You'll be taking in then a bunch of oxidized fatty acids, which are pro-oxidants, anti-aging factors, and basically toxic to your body. So if you're going to cook, the best one to cook with is coconut oil. Even olive oil suffers a bit when you heat it up. Okay, as a vegan, how can I balance my omega-3 and 6 intake? Well, we were just discussing this topic earlier today in a meeting. And for a vegan, the best place to go is algae and algae oils. There are now currently on the market algae oils in large bottles and in capsules that are very rich in DHA. However, there are new algae oils coming on the market that have a much, much higher EPA level, so that you get a virtually balanced EPA and DHA content. I don't have the brand names for that yet, but look for them. Look for them. Otherwise, you're pretty much stuck, because vegetarians have a very high omega-6 fatty acid intake, and vegans. So, okay. How do omega-3s accumulate in the brain? Well, they cross the blood-brain barrier. DHA can get across the blood-brain barrier and is utilized in the brain. It's pretty simple in that regard. What about grapeseed oil? Grapeseed oil is a nice oil, but it is abundant, overloaded in omega-6s. It is a seed oil after all. Is there a blood test for testing available to measure the amount of omega-3 in the body? Oh, I've never been posed that question before. There probably is. And it would probably have to be a very sophisticated test that would extract red blood cells and platelet cells and check them for their eicosanoid content in the platelets and for the cell membrane lipid content in the red blood cells.
That would be about the only way it could be done. And you'd probably need a university laboratory or some sort of specialized medical laboratory to do that. Let me see. The best time of day to consume omega-3 oils. The best time of day to consume omega-3 oils is any time of the day. Just be sure to take them with food. And it's best to take them at a rather full meal that contains some other food that has some fats in it, because then you'll get a maximum flow of bile from the gallbladder. That will help emulsify all the fats, and you'll get maximum absorption then of the omega-3s. Will increased omega-3s in krill oil affect the body that takes a blood thinner? Eliquis. Okay. Here's a question about blood thinners. You've got Eliquis, Coumadin, and what are some of the others? A person can escape from pharmaceutical blood thinners by upping their intake of omega-3 fatty acids with fish oil capsules, krill oil capsules, using ginkgo biloba extract, even grapeseed extract. These things will lower blood viscosity. There's also lumbrokinase, nattokinase, serratiopeptidase, and bromelain. Those 4 enzymes are fibrinolytic enzymes that can further reduce the risk of random blood clots forming anywhere in the body. A combination of these nutrients can be used to completely escape the need to use pharmaceutical blood thinners. But the way I recommend it being done is that one gradually increase their intake of the fibrinolytic enzymes and the omega-3 oils and the ginkgo biloba and the grapeseed extract. Just gradually increase those. At the same time, keep going in for your blood tests that are required with these blood thinners, and slowly wean your way off of them. Now, the bad news is that regular hospital laboratories do not have a test that can measure how effective these natural blood thinning nutrients are working. And so the regular tests they do, say for Coumadin, or even testing for Eliquis, will not measure the same things that that you need to have measured in order to tell how effective the natural forms are doing. There are sophisticated tests required. I do have those written down somewhere, and I know what they are if I can find that piece of paper. But you have to have a specialized laboratory do it. Or you can simply wing it. A simple pinprick on the tip of your finger will tell you how effective your natural blood thinning regimen is how well it's working. Because if you prick your finger and the blood keeps flowing easily and keeps flowing and keeps flowing and keeps flowing, you know you've achieved your goal. If it clots right away, you still aren't there. Okay. I ate ground flax seeds. I'm sorry you do. As much as possible for blood pressure. Will ground flax seeds, very cheap, help reduce inflammation? Ground flax seeds, well, flax seeds themselves are loaded with alpha-linolenic acid, the vegetable form of omega-3. They also have a very healthy shot of omega-6 fatty acids, linoleic acid. Given that the omega-3s in flaxseed can auto-oxidize very quickly, I do not and never have looked at flax or flax seeds or flaxseed oil as effective anti-inflammatory agents or as effective at thinning blood. In fact, if you want to eat de-oiled flax seeds for extra fiber, that's great. Turning toward them as any sort of valuable source of vegetable oil is something I disagree with. So no, I would say that eating ground flax seeds, well, okay. Eating ground flax seeds could very well help for blood pressure simply by keeping everything in the colon swept clean, because slow movement through the bowels does increase blood pressure. So in that regard, eating the flax is good. Do not look at flax as a source of as an effective source of omega-3s that will be cardioprotective or will help reduce plaque in the arteries. And of course, that plaque can also raise blood pressure. Okay, Robert. Is there a blood test for omega-3s from a company? Oh, there's a blood test. Oh, good. Here we go. Thank you, Robert. Here's what he says. Yes, there is a blood test for omega-3s from a company called Lipid Labs. Great. Thank you, Robert. And he sends the link, http://lipidlab, LIPIDLAB.com, lipidlab.com. I take high amounts of nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory for pain. Should I be cautious of the amount of omega-3s? No. As a matter of fact, taking the omega-3s may allow you to reduce your intake of the pharmaceutical anti-inflammatories. There's also a new botanical supplement called Paractin, which is a potent anti-inflammatory, an effective one. There's 5-loxin and Opraflex, which are Boswellia serrata extracts that are potent anti-inflammatories. There are, of course, curcuminoids, which are potent anti-inflammatories. If you can find it, there are philodendron extracts, which are very good anti-inflammatories. These are all good COX-2 inhibitors that have very little effect on COX-1. What is your position regarding GLA, gamma-linolenic acid, and this statement? Gamma-linolenic acid, found in evening primrose oil, borage oil, and black currant oil, is an important fatty acid that plays a beneficial role in healthy prostaglandin PGE1 formation and pro-inflammatory mediator reduction. I agree with that. However, that's a different prostaglandin than I was talking about as related to arterial health. There are prostaglandins and prostacyclins synthesized throughout your body, and different fatty acids will have different effects in those different parts. So yes, gamma-linolenic acid is fine to take. Let's see here. Okay, let me just scroll a little bit to see that I haven't missed one, because sometimes while I was, where's the, oh, there it is. There we go. Because the, okay, I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything. Hey, come on. Uh-oh. I can't get this to scroll. There we go. There we go. Okay. All right, I think I got them all. Okay. There I am. See, I'm actually a living person. And I'm looking over here to see if there are any more questions coming in. It's your last chance. Should we begin the countdown? The countdown to the closing of the question and answer period will begin. Here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Oh. And James says, thank you so much. Thank you, James. Thanks very much. Okay, everybody. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are done. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.